Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR, is a declaration adopted by the United Nations General Assembly the 10th of December 1948. Drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Canadian John Peters Humphrey was called upon by the United Nations Secretary General to work on the project and became the declaration's principal drafter. So it was indeed a Canadian named John Peters Humphrey that was the documentation's principal drafter. The following countries voted in favor for the declaration. And then it lists the countries here. Now, if you notice, Dominion of Canada. So Canada signed on to this declaration and is under this declaration. So as you saw in the Declaration of Human Rights, Canada signed the agreement. So Canada agreed to follow these articles, and they agreed to fulfill and provide the remedy for these articles to make sure that you're able to have these articles fulfilled in your life. It says that a Canadian was the primary drafter of the declaration. So not only did Canada agree to this documentation, the primary drafter of this documentation was a Canadian. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is the declaration itself. Article 1 states, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are, meaning the human beings, endowed with reason and conscience and should act, notice should, act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. So Article 1 of the Universal Human Rights Declaration states that all human beings are born free. They are born equal and they all have equal rights. All of us. Every single human being that is born are granted a certain amount of rights that are given to you because you are a human being. And you will be interested to know what these rights are. But I just want you to realize first here that it says we are all equal. Every one of us are equal. Article 2 states this. Everyone is entitled. Notice that word, entitled, to all the rights and freedoms in the declaration. So all the rights and all the freedoms that are mentioned in this declaration, you who are watching this video are entitled to these rights and freedoms. And everyone else that you know are entitled to these rights and freedoms. And it continues to say, without distinction of any kind. So if you're black, if you're white, if you're Chinese, if you're Indian, if you're Pakistani, if you're Lebanese, no matter who you are in this world, you are a human being. And that's why when we're young, we're always taught that we are one family, we are one race, we are the human beings, we are the human race. And this declaration here is expressing that fact. Because Article 1 is saying, look, we are all equal. Whether you want to make a distinction because you're black or you're white or you're French and you're English, that's your choice. But this declaration is saying we are all equal. And by the fact that we are all equal, we are all entitled to, we are all granted the rights that are in this declaration, as you're going to see in my video. Entitled, to grant a legal right to or qualify for. So to grant a legal right to or qualify for. Black Laws Dictionary. Entitlement. An absolute right to a benefit such as Social Security granted immediately upon meeting a legal requirement. So an entitlement is an absolute right to a benefit. So the Charter says that everyone is entitled. Entitled. Well, if you change that, it's meaning entitlement. That's what they're trying to say. Everyone has an entitlement. Everyone is entitled. Means you are granted, or you have the absolute right. The right belongs to you. The benefits in the declaration. You have a right to them. No one can take them away from you, and no one's supposed to be able to deny you these benefits, because they are entitlements. Article 3 states this, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Now when we jump into the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, Article 7 states this: everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So the first part of this verse is the same as in the Human Rights Declaration of the UN. Now the rest of it, and the right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. So they're saying that you have all these rights, but they can deprive you of these rights with the principles of fundamental justice. The Declaration of Human Rights and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms both start off by saying everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So we all have those entitlements. No one can say that we are not entitled to those three stipulations. Now, in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it goes on to state that these rights can be deprived through principles of fundamental justice. So what they're saying here is that these rights that are granted to you, they can be taken away through an operation of law. When they state principles of fundamental justice, it's another way of saying through an operation of law. So everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, but those can be taken away through an operation of law, which we see them doing here in Canada. Black Law's Dictionary: deprivation, deprived, an act of taking away of property, a withholding of something, the state of being without something, a removal or degradation from office. So it's an act of taking away something. Deprivation of food. Look at that. A withholding of something. Deprivation of food. So black laws, it teaches that deprivation means taking away, withholding something, a state of being without something. So they're saying that through an operation of law, they can place you in a state of being without your fundamental rights. They can withhold your fundamental rights. They can take away your fundamental rights that have been granted to you as a human being under the Declaration of Human Rights. And indeed, that is what they're doing. Article 25. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstance beyond his control. So listen, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being. Everyone has the right to food, clothing, housing, and medical care. Those are your rights that have been granted to you through this declaration. Those are your rights as a human being that have been granted to you. And no one can take these rights away from you except if they use an operation of law to strip from you, to remove from you these rights. So you see, in Article 25 of the Universal Human Rights Declaration, it states that everyone has the right to food. You're entitled to food. You're entitled to clothing. You're entitled to housing. You're entitled to medical care. And you're entitled to social services. These are rights and freedoms that have been granted to you. And it's Canada's duty. The people who work in the government positions in Canada, it's their duty and responsibility to make sure that these rights are being fulfilled in your life. And if you see that the system around you that they have created are actually stripping you of your rights instead of fulfilling these rights for you, then you can make a claim because they are failing to grant you what is yours as a human being. And as you see, they are stripping us of all of our rights by declaring us legal persons and taxing us and charging us and making us pay licenses and fees, taking our rights away from the human that we have been given and making us pay for them as a legal person. Article 26 states that education shall be free. no charges for education, no school fees for education. And they state it this way: elementary or fundamental levels. Well, it's pretty easy to argue what's fundamental levels living in a North American society concerning education. But nevertheless, they state that education shall be free. So all the school charges that they're asking you to pay, school taxes for the children, commission to whatever there, where they send you a school bill and all this, excuse me, no charges. So as human beings, you've been granted entitlements and rights to food, to housing, to clothing, to medical care, and to education. And if you're wondering at this point, well, why would we be granted all these rights? Why wouldn't you be granted all these rights? All the animals and all the food that is here, apples, pears, oranges, strawberries, any food you can name, it was here before the people were. It was here before the governments were. Food was free and should be free. But they've taken it and they've used it as a market now in order to make dollar bills, in order to enrich a few. But this declaration protects you against all that's going on. But nevertheless, food is free. Housing and clothing, medical care, education, they decided back in those days to grant us these rights as human beings. Because when they made observation across the planet, they realized that without having this structure as a foundation in your country, that it destroys people, that it creates crime, and it doesn't build the country, it destroys the country. It produces people that wind up in jail for stealing because they have no food, because there's no work, or for stealing because they can't get clothing, because there's no work. So they decided that for a foundation to be built upon, that's what they would use. And these rights and entitlements are yours. We are never taught that. So when we come to this in our adulthood, to these understandings, some of us have trouble to accept it. Because we've been taught, and I know myself included, from a young lad, you work. You work hard. For everything you earn and everything you get, you put your energy into. And these entitlements here, they still will require you to work to some degree. Not the type of work that you think to build somebody else's kingdom, but it still requires some degree of work. But nevertheless, it's not in the same context that we've been taught. Now, our fundamental rights that have been granted to us, it comes in the form of our patrimony here. If you watch my other videos concerning the patrimony here in Quebec, well, they strip us. They remove these fundamental rights from us through an operation of law. That is considered making a constructive registered holder over our equity or over our rights to these. And by such, they're saying that we are fulfilling this charter rights that these people have by the systems we created here in Canada. But most of us sitting here can sit back and say, these systems here that they've created in Canada, it does not fulfill my needs. When I'm in need, when I'm in a bad situation, and I go to these social services, what I'm getting from these social services, they don't help me to the extent that I need. And if you people, I'm sorry to say it in that way, would understand the resources that are behind these systems, the resources that you are entitled to, and the little bit of percentage that they give to you to help you, it would make you saddened to see what's going on, while the few up in the big chairs sit there with collecting all the wealth upon the backs of the poor people or of the hurting people, when all of us as human beings have all these rights and we have all these entitlements, but they've stripped it all away from us here in Canada. And there's some of us across Canada now that are working on behalf of all of us to try and get our rights and our entitlements returned to us. There's no reason there should be poverty in Canada. There's no reason people should be living on the street. There's no reason people should be without food here in this country. We are such a wealthy country. It is a crime and it is a shame that the people in power would sit there and steal the resources and steal the wealth of the people and make them suffer and think that there's no consequences to their actions. Article 30. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. So what happened, Canada? You were the primary drafter in this documentation. You signed onto this documentation. And now you stripped all your human beings of their rights through their legal person. And you are stripping them of their money and their gain through making them pay for all these rights now. And you're calling yourself a free country, but you're a corporation who are robbing from the human beings their rights that were given to them through natural birth.